I have a problem, and it's with you.
Me? Why?
That little stunt you pulled in the last book, where it was about the best friend and the primary love interest, it worked a little too well.
I'm sorry?
Reviews came in. The new one brought the critics to their knees. The climax with the 2 gunshots is absolutely beloved by fans. This installment is considered to be far and away the best one in the entire series. So far. It was a massive success.
That's great. I don't see what's wrong.
Now the audience finds the dorky little hacker girl interesting.
Oh, I see. Now everyone likes your love triangle even less because they have no reason to root for your second girl.
How are we going to fix this? No choice. We're gonna have to kill her.
What? That's way too drastic. What's wrong with you?
No, let's hear this out.
There's no use for the second love interest. Her whole shtick was that she was the only other person the protagonist had ever met who had superpowers. If we kill her now, we can get her out of the way of the first love interest and show just how much danger the protagonist is in because he lives in this world where people aren't nice to people with superpowers.
Wait, what? I thought her whole thing was that she expected to die at a young age because of her psychic abilities. How does killing her make that better?
It doesn't. It makes it a tragedy.
Hang on. I see where you're coming from, and I see the potential, but we're going to have a problem. People are going to think her entire character was pointless in the first place. Her interest in the protagonist ended up meaning nothing.
I don't know. Say she died for love or something. I don't care.
Are you doing okay, buddy?
I am out. I'll help with this one, but after that, I think I'm gonna skate. You have great ideas that the critics love, and the character that I came up with, while interesting in concept, ultimately kind of makes scenes drag on in a way that's frankly painful to read.
Wait, you're leaving? How am I supposed to do this without you? Without your weird, directionless ideas, I'll have no choice but to focus on the elements of the plot that actually matter.
That's where you're wrong. There's always a choice. I'll see you guys around. Do unto others.
Do unto others.
Do unto others.
Hello everybody, it's Jade. This week we're covering 0 Hour, the 6th book in the HIVE series, or as I like to call it, Book 3-2, because we're doing the Book 3 thing all over again, except this time we're doing it a little bit remixed. I hope you all enjoyed 0 Hour, because I certainly did. Earlier in the series, I listed the books that are generally considered to be the best, and the books that are generally considered to be the worst, and for some strange reason, I put book 6 in the bottom 4. Now, the strange reason is because a lot of people dislike the way that Lucy Dexter's death is handled. However, when we determine whether we like something, we are not generally evaluating whether it lacks things that are bad. What evokes an emotional response in people, particularly about literature or other pieces of media, is the presence of good things, not the absence of bad things. And there are a couple of paragraphs in 0 Hour that are genuinely bad. There are aspects to this that are not as enjoyable as others. It took me like 4 days to force myself to read this book because I knew we were going to have to deal with the beeping love triangle. But once I got past chapter 1, I remembered something about 0 Hour. And that's that it's the best book in the series. Okay, maybe it's not the best. We still haven't gotten through 7, 8, and 9. But the thing is, this book is incredible. I enjoyed Rogue last week, and Rogue is most people's favorite. The whole gimmick where Wing is the main character instead of Otto is really well executed. But ultimately, there's a reason Wing isn't the main character. We're here to read about Otto. We care about Otto. We love Otto. And this book has hands down the best Otto content that we've seen so far. We've spent the last 5 books establishing who he is and then torturing him. But now we get to see how he's changed and who he's become and how he responds to even further stress and even more trauma and tragedy. On top of that, now that Nero has grown out of being only the headmaster of a school and into being the most powerful man on the planet, we get to see how he behaves with this mentality, with this knowledge. The parallels in this book between characters, between this book and book 3, callbacks to things that have happened in 4, 5, and 6 are incredibly rich. And when I think about the things that make this series amazing, when I think about the reason why I wanted to dedicate 10 weeks of my life to covering this series, every single one of them is not only present in 0 Hour, but is strongest in 0 Hour. Without further ado, let's get started. So the major theme of this book is evil versus Oblivion. And I've talked a little bit about evil versus Oblivion before, but evil versus Oblivion refers to the idea that for someone who wants to rule the planet, there must be a planet left to rule. It is in Glove's best interest to protect Earth because they live on it. If the Earth explodes, if the Earth is covered in nanites, then all of the Glove ruling council is dead. Glove doesn't benefit. So, if you've ever heard of D&D, okay, everybody's heard of D&D, but if you know the alignment system in D&D, there's this system of lawful versus chaotic, where a lawful person tries to follow the laws and manipulate the laws and stay within the normal actions of society. And chaotic is people who try to stay away from the law, try to screw with the law, try to manipulate the government or stay away from it. That is completely independent of whether a person is good or evil. The thing about Glove is that there are good and evil people in Glove and on the Glove ruling council. But what everybody in Glove shares is an alignment with chaos. They understand or they agree that they don't like the way the world is run, and they don't want to be subject to government rule, to laws made by the government. They don't want to be subject to societal norms. They want to operate of their own volition. And that is what Nero is trying to teach the students at HIVE. He recognizes these children who are going to be forces of chaos in the future and wants to teach them a set of rules for them to govern themselves by, not to be governed by someone else, but he wants to teach them to evaluate things for themselves. And that is what he's trying to achieve with the HIVE. He knows that these people are not going to follow the law. So if they are not going to follow the law, what are they going to do? Well, he needs to give them, even if he can't give them a moral compass, he needs to give them the ability to evaluate whether they truly want to do something. What are the consequences of my actions? Are these consequences something that I really want? Am I behaving overly emotionally? Am I being selfish? Am I being short-sighted? So that's what Glove stands for. Glove stands for, we are not going to follow the rules. We are not going to participate in the rest of society. But we are going to want the Earth to continue spinning tomorrow. So with that in mind, who are the disciples thematically? The disciples are people who are the opposite. They want to participate in society. They have incredibly important jobs. People like Jason Drake, who runs a Lockheed Martin analog, who lives in the middle of New York City and creates technology that impacts everybody on the planet. But he doesn't care about tomorrow. He doesn't care about whether the United States is still standing. And this may seem like a kind of character who doesn't exist in real life, but I think that Mark Walden is really trying to make a political or ideological statement here. The example that comes to mind, and the example that I honestly think Mark Walden is thinking about, is global warming. With global warming, you have people who want to take on the cost of changing the way our infrastructure works now so that we can preserve the planet as best we can for later. And then you have people who say, it's important that we continue what we're doing now so that I can rise to the top. I'm going to ignore the rest of the world and try to continue doing things most effectively for my own gain. An easy example here is Pietor Furan. In fact, Pietor Furan is the sort of prototypical disciple for this idea. He knows very well that Overlord intends to end the planet and enslave all of the people. But Overlord has promised him that he will be one of the people left unenslaved at the end of the day. He will be one of the people who gets to make decisions concerning the future of Earth. And Pietor Furan is a selfish man. He is okay with the demise of thousands, nigh billions of other people in order to benefit only himself. Glove represents evil. Glove represents chaos. Overlord and his disciples represent Oblivion. So, what are some other characters who have a piece in this thematic puzzle? Lucy represents hope in the face of Oblivion. Constant small efforts to stand against the darkness, even when it seems overwhelmingly likely. There's a conversation that Lucy has with Otto at the beginning of this book, where she talks about how she didn't have very much hope for her own future growing up. And she seems to be someone who doesn't really know where her life is going and doesn't know if she has a future. But despite all of the danger that she's been in, despite the way the world sees her, she still tries to be a good person. She still tries to maintain her own sanity and her own self-control. She is the antithesis of Overlord. She's directly opposite him. She knows that protecting her own goodness is difficult, but she's going to make effort every day to watch out for herself and maintain her own emotional purity. After this conversation, Lucy spreads this hope and this drive to Otto, who then spends the rest of the book spreading it to everybody else. He fights constantly for his own autonomy and spreads hope to other characters like Nero and Raven. At one point early in the book, he steps between Nero and Raven when Nero is preparing to kill Raven because he believes that she cannot be saved. And Otto tells him, no, we cannot give up on her. We have to believe that there is a way to save her. He sees that the most likely outcome is Oblivion, is the death of Raven. But he wants to take the chance and fight to get her back. And the character that's caught in the middle through all of this is Nero. He's seen a lot of loss. He knows he's going to suffer more in his own future. And no matter how hard he wants to fight to protect his students and Raven, he knows he's not going to be able to save all of them. He knows that he's going to have to face some kind of destruction. He doesn't know what it is, but he has to keep trying. So at the beginning of the book, the Alphas are doing this training simulation thing, and long story short, Wing wins. But Otto looks up at Wing and sees that Wing is struggling with the events of the past few weeks. Few weeks, you say? Yeah. The distance between 0 Hour and Rogue is actually way shorter than I remember. Otto talks about how he's been having nightmares for the past few weeks since he woke up from his coma at the end of Rogue. So he's still really reeling from what happened. And the other person that's really reeling is Wing, the one who just shot his own dad. So Otto is going to go through a bunch of different people and look for comfort from them over the course of this book. And he's not able to get it from Wing because Wing is also struggling. Now, Wing is struggling, but he is dealing. But Otto, on the other hand, is drowning. Otto is doing really, really badly. That night we see that he's having nightmares that Wing has to wake him up from because he's screaming, because he keeps feeling like he's not out of Overlord's clutches. So he goes to talk to Hive Mind and asks Hive Mind to look around inside his head and verify that Overlord is no longer there. Now, the thing about Hive Mind is, in the last book, he basically got a complete code rewrite. His core, his personality is the same, his memories are the same, because he was able to hook back up to his original database. But Overlord created an entirely new, architecture for him. So he has undergone this complete change in the way he works. He went from being a relatively dumb AI who wanted to see more of the world to now being something entirely different, something closer to Overlord in structure, even if not in personality. So when Hive Mind roots around in Otto's mind, he has this reaction where he starts to be curious about what it's like to be alive. Now, we've always gotten the sense that Hive Mind had a little bit of a Pinocchio complex, but it was more like he wanted to see the outside world and not that he wanted to actually be a real boy. Hive Mind's Pinocchio issues come in full force in this book. However, now's not really the time for him to be having these issues. Otto needs help, and instead of comforting him, Hive Mind starts thinking about how he wants to be a real boy. So Otto leaves this conversation not feeling better, not being comforted, still reeling, still drowning. So Wing can't help him, Hive Mind can't help him. So Otto goes and sits in the Grappler training cavern, and eventually someone approaches him. It's our dear, darling Lucy Dexter. And the thing is, I'm not sure what should have been done with the plot about Lucy Dexter, because she is a really interesting character. She is a kind and strong character. And her interactions with Otto throughout this book are sweet and positive. It's undoubtable that the words she gives him here help him. However, I was part of the intended audience when I read this. In fact, when I got to this book, I was a little bit older than the intended audience. And I hated her. I hated the fact that she was in this story. At the end of this book, when she dies, all of my friends who were reading it and I were happy that she died, because Otto's mental health be damned, we didn't want her around. So I don't know what should have been done, because between the three of us that were in my friend group reading this, all of us drew the same conclusion. So I assumed that that was a common conclusion for the original reader base to come to. The things that she says to Otto in this conversation are very sage and exactly what he needs to be hearing, and very thematic to the rest of the story, but I, as a kid, missed it. I think that Lucy should have been someone else to Otto, but I don't know who she should have been. I don't know if she should have just been a friend. I don't know if she should have been some long-lost cousin through cloning or something like that. Because as a teenager, I was not mature enough to handle this plot line. At the same time, as an adult reading this, seeing a love triangle makes me think of something as juvenile. So I was too young for it when I read it first. Now I'm too old for it. I read it a couple times in the middle, and I didn't think it was executed well then either. Lucy contributes something really, really interesting to this series. She's one of the most interesting characters Mark Walden has introduced. And I don't know how she should have been handled. But we've got her conversations now. The story is over. We can't change it. So let's talk about what we have. I forgot to mention something important about the nightmare that Otto has been having. He dreams that he is standing in front of his bathroom mirror, and his face splits open, and behind his face is Overlord. And Overlord tells him, "You're mine. You always have been and always will be." Otto is really starting to struggle with something specific. He's always been an intensely independent person. He never had a parent or anyone resembling a parent. Now he spent 6 months owned by one person and trying to hold back someone else who thinks he owns him. Otto lost his bodily autonomy, and now he's struggling with his sense of individuality. He wants to be his own person, but over the course of the past 6 months, he's had it hammered into him over and over again, the idea that he isn't his own person anymore. So he's starting to really, really wonder who he should be. The things that made him who he was when he was a child, his deviousness, his ability to manipulate people, are what got him into the Hive. But now he realizes that those things came from someone he doesn't want to be. They came from number one, and he doesn't want to be like number one. And those are the kind of qualities that Overlord, while Overlord found them annoying, they're qualities that Overlord also possesses. He doesn't want to be Overlord, and he doesn't want to be number one. So if he doesn't have his deviousness, if he doesn't have his intelligence, if he doesn't have his strength with computers, if he doesn't have his ability to manipulate people, who is he? So we get this line. "I know that we're supposed to be learning how to control the world, how to mislead others and spread corruption. But what if that's all our lives are ever going to be? What if I turn into the sort of person who created me? Maybe all I'll ever do is hurt the people I care about. What kind of a life is that?" And the thing is, Otto is now starting to realize that he got the best possible future for the childhood that he had. His acceptance into the Hive was 100% fitted for the person that he was. And now he's starting to wonder if this is the future that he wants. Maybe, after all, he does not want to be a supervillain. He does love Nero, and he does love his friends, and he loves the time that he spends at the Hive. But he doesn't know if he wants to be evil. And so he is actually learning the lesson that Nero wanted him to learn, which is to think for himself. I'm sure that if Otto were to decide to, start a tech company that doesn't listen in on people and makes computers that are better than anything else on the market, and overall is like a good version of Google that takes down Google and Apple and all that stuff, but ultimately doesn't do evil plots, I think that Nero would be proud of him. But he hasn't figured that out yet. He doesn't know Nero well enough yet. So he tells this to Lucy, and she tells him about her mother, a person who died. And Lucy says, "She taught me that we're all free to choose our own path, even when other people want to manipulate us or steer us in different directions. She knew what it was like to grow up being told that you've got some kind of grand destiny, but she had the strength to make her own decisions. That was all she wanted for me, the freedom to choose what I would become. I don't know if she would approve of my life now, but what I do know is that the fact that we're being taught how to manipulate and deceive doesn't mean that that's the only path we can take. There is one thing she used to say to me all the time. There always has to be a choice." And then they kiss. And the thing about Lucy is, Otto met her like 2 weeks ago, basically. But she is the only person who can actually, for one, she's the only person that actually noticed that he was drowning and reached out to him and talked to him about it. She's also the only person who can understand what he's going through, the only person who understands what it's like to be afraid that you are going to be manipulated for your talents at all times. The kind of trauma that Otto faced last book, Lucy has had tiny doses of throughout her entire life. She's intimately familiar with the idea because at this point, as far as we know, Lucy is the last remaining psychic on the planet. That's an immense pressure. So the thing after this is that Otto, he is able to sleep the following night. He acts nicer and happier all the time because he has been given something else to think about. He, instead of obsessing over the idea that his dad might want to come after him again, he is able to at least ponder the idea that there is a girl who likes him. And I'm happy for him because he really just needed something to break the mental track that he was repeating over and over and over again. And Wing couldn't help him, and Hive Mind couldn't help him, and Laura didn't help him. By the way, that's my opinion on that. Laura acts all... I want to say bitchy. I'm just going to say it. Laura acts a little bitchy about the fact that Otto is now pursuing some other girl, but she didn't try to help him. She didn't reach out and be supportive. So the girl that is supportive gets to date him. Sorry. The thing about this book is that we kind of know that Otto is not going to end up with Lucy. And that also is a bit of a problem with the writing. It's never... I don't think there's a member of the audience that believes that Otto could end up with Lucy. And maybe that's a good thing, maybe it's not, I'm not sure. They do make a pretty good pair. They're supportive of each other, they listen to each other, they watch out for each other. And finally, in this installment, which is the last one that Lucy is even in, Mark Walden has finally figured out how to write her, which is unfortunate. So Raven is a bad guy in this one. And so Raven has been injected with Animus, so she's controlled by the bad guys in this one. And this was probably the best decision that Mark Walden ever made. Okay, maybe not the best, but it was a really good decision on Mark Walden's part. Because Mark Walden wants to make Raven look like a badass at all times. He never does anything that makes us think that Raven is lame. We have to believe that she's the coolest person in existence. Every sentence that she's on the page. And a lot of times, Mark Walden has done a little bit of a cop-out with some of the villains where he makes them act stupid. He makes them underestimate certain people, usually Raven, or make the wrong call. The Phalanx being a really great example of villains who fell victim to this. But Mark Walden doesn't want to make Raven look bad, even while she's the villain. And so finally, we have a truly competent antagonist in this book, in Raven. And she cleans the floor with the good guys. She captures the whole hive. She attacks the GCHQ and captures Otto, Laura, and Lucy and brings them back to Overlord. Every goal that she has in this book, she achieves. It really worked. But before anybody figures out that she's playing the imposter this week, she gets the 5 main kids out of their technology class and takes them out and is trying to kidnap them. And Otto finally uses his good at reading people ability about 2 sentences before she straight up tells them that she's been infected with the Animus. And Nero decides that he needs to shoot her for the good of everyone because she's probably the most intimidating person they could have the misfortune of having to face. And he recognizes that they probably should kill her to eliminate the threat that she poses. But Otto stands up for her here, and he says, no, we have to save her. We have to find a way to save her. And then a couple scenes later, he does the same thing with Hive Mind. I'm really proud of Otto for standing up for his own autonomy here. He's feeling like he's lost control, but he is doing everything in his power to reach for it, to grab onto it in whatever way he can. And the ways that manifests is by saving Raven, saving Hive Mind. He risks his own life to try to reprogram the Animus to save Raven, because he would rather be doing everything he possibly can be doing it on his own than sit back and let things happen to him. He doesn't want to be controlled by other people anymore, and he's going to do whatever it takes to be in control. So I wrote a couple paragraphs at some point when I reached this point in my reading, and I said, I adore Otto as a protagonist. He's one of my favorite fictional characters of all time, if not my favorite. He's so sympathetic and so unique. The last few installments have made us watch him unravel as a person. He's a loving person, a giving person, but he's selfish enough to not want to be sacrificed, even when it's the only thing that makes sense. He wants to live and he wants to be himself, and I've rarely seen another piece of media that makes it seem so impossible for him to be able to achieve either of those things. In this book, we see that even though he's free of Overlord's control, Otto doesn't get to have his own thoughts. He's plagued with PTSD, and even when he isn't, he's tired, irritable, and afraid. He scrambles desperately for a way to be himself again, for hope in his own future. And there is something. The hope comes in the form of Lucy Dexter, someone he barely knows but who represents a possible new avenue to happiness. Over the course of the book, his confidence and his ability to protect himself and others grows, until it's dashed to pieces at the end of the story. So Nero takes the 5 main kids plus the 2 auxiliary kids plus Pike plus Hive Mind to the submarine pen, which apparently does actually exist. And, or rather, the submarine pen is forced into existence when Diabolus crashes the Megalodon into the side of the boat bay, and they are able to board and get away safely, thus leaving the school under the control of the disciples, which was interesting to me because throughout this book, Nero sort of waffles a little bit on how much he's willing to give up. Like I said, for the most powerful man on the planet, he sure is willing to give up a decent amount. He abandons the Hive after it's been captured. Partially because, logically, they aren't going to just start executing children for no reason. Literally, why would they do that? And also, he recognizes that his best bet of freeing the other students and teachers is by getting off the island and launching some kind of counterattack. But still, it's the exact opposite of the captain goes down with the ship thing that you would expect from a non-supervillain. And, yeah, I'm sure that all of the students and teachers that were left at the Hive felt incredible about him leaving them there. Anyway, so they board the Megalodon and then spend a couple of days there. Actually, it seems like it's about 1 day. This whole story takes place over the course of probably like a maximum of 3 days, 2 nights. And then the kids are sent on a mission by themselves, which is pretty neat. But I want to talk about a couple of other things before we get to that. So the first thing to talk about is Wingleby. Wing is doing similarly to Otto from the events of the last book, just to a lesser degree. And on top of that, he doesn't really like enclosed spaces or being locked on the Megalodon without anywhere to go. And there is a delightful little scene where he and Shelby are sparring and then end up making out. delightful because the quality of banter that these two are able to put out is just really, really nice. And the thing is, in the first episode of this series on Hive, I was able to contrast Otto and Laura really directly, where I talked about, he's an orphan, but she comes from a healthy family, and the differences in their mindset that makes them get along and stuff. And the thing is, Wing and Shelby just plain don't have that. And where I've always kind of suspected that... Okay, I guess I should get into my little theory. I've always kind of suspected that Nero / the rest of the Hive staff is pairing up the students for the benefit of Glove. Specifically because Otto and Laura were paired up on the first day. It is to Glove's benefit that Otto and Laura end up together potentially and basically replace Jason Drake or Cypher or somebody like that and tie each other to the Hive and to Glove, and continue to produce technology for Glove. So I've always sort of suspected that Pike or the Contessa or Nero or somebody, or maybe it was even Hive Mind, went through the students and went, all right, can we shoehorn some of these kids into couples by making them friends at a young age? And hopefully they will stick together and produce great things and potentially useful children for Glove in the future. And that's always kind of how I interpreted the relationship between Otto and Laura. I do not get the same sense from Wing and Shelby. They are very different. The only things they have in common are things that they have in common because of their relationship with each other. Shelby learns martial arts from Wing. She didn't know martial arts in advance. Wing is not a particularly adept gymnast, and any stealth ability that he has gained over the course of the series likely comes from his need to compete with Shelby. They have different senses of humor, and yet they deeply respect each other. You can feel in Wing's narration that he seems to genuinely admire Shelby. He knows that she's not as good a fighter as he is, but he watches the way that she focuses when they're sparring with something like admiration. She respects him because he's playing a different game than she is. They're very different. But Shelby wants adventure. She wants variety. She wants to learn everything, and as part of that, she wants to date someone who is very different from her. But they are still very close and understand each other. That's what I wrote about that. The thing is, I think it's okay in fiction for two people to just like each other. There's not a whole bunch of grand thematic parallels between Wing and Shelby, but their dynamic is delightful to read, and I believe when I watch them interact with each other that they care about each other and that they make a good match, and I enjoy the scenes where they appear together, and that is ultimately what's important at the end of the day. We've got this complex thematic thing going on with Otto and Lucy, and I'm sure we will have plenty of other things to say about Otto and Laura in the future, but Wing and Shelby are just two people who get along and also happen to like each other, and I think that that is enough. Throughout the rest of this book, they back-to-back fight. They walk around and judge people silently with each other, or rather whisper their little judgments about other people to each other, and it's just pleasant to read. Yeah. Mark Walden fumbled with Otto and Lucy, but he definitely did something right with Wing and Shelby. The kids go to the GCHQ. There's a delightful scene where the kids have to steal a car and drive somewhere, and they're all making fun of each other and all that kind of stuff. It's really great. Wing drives. The kids have already learned how to drive cars in school, so you can keep telling me they're 13, but the math says they're 16. They're at least 16. Anyway, the 5 kids plus Hive Mind. It's really great. There is a joke that Shelby tells Hive Mind that Hive Mind later repeats. There's a couple of times in this series where Hive Mind actually picks up on Shelby's humor and then integrates it into his own humor. In this case, she jokes about whether Otto's brain implant is roomy enough for him to exist in, and then later on, when Hive Mind is placed back into his home server, he makes basically the same joke that Shelby made before, which is just really delightful. The kids go to the GCHQ where there is this thing called Echelon, which is basically this global monitoring system that filters everybody's phone calls and stuff. And the thing is, back when this book came out in 2010, this was surprising or a horrifying idea, but it not only turned out to exist, but Echelon itself is a real thing that exists today, unless it's been shut down recently, and I just haven't heard about it, but this is a real thing. This is not sci-fi. The sci-fi bit is that Otto shuts it down later. The utopian sci-fi element of this series is that at the end of this book, Echelon no longer exists. Anyway, and then, so they go and see that this Echelon thing exists, and the kids are horrified, but Otto is most horrified. He hates that this thing exists, and so he takes it upon himself to write this virus that he will later be able to use to shut it down. And the thing about that is, it is something undeniably good that Otto does. I don't think most people who... Okay, there are undoubtedly people in this world who believe that Echelon existing is a good thing. But you are supposed to believe that Otto is doing a good thing in the moment when he does it. Not a supervillain thing. However, it is the exact kind of supervillain thing that Nero wants the Alphas doing. He sees a problem in the way the global government works, and he shut it down. He infiltrated the facility, wrote some code, and shut it down so that it can no longer be used against the people of Earth. Yeah. And he made his own judgment about it. Nobody told him to do it. However, because Raven is one of the bad guys in this book, she is able to know that they are trying to execute the 0 Hour Protocol, and she attacks them at the GCHQ, and she's able to capture Laura, Otto, and Lucy, and just away with them. Overlord makes some poor judgments concerning the situation later, but Raven's judgment is always impeccable, even when she is an antagonist. It's great. We and Shelby are rescued by Nero, and they take a helicopter back to the Leviathan, which is yet another one of Diabolus's toys. And when they arrive there, they meet up with a bunch of people that turn out to be somebody really interesting. And I wanted to read this part. The thing about this scene is that this scene is hands down my favorite scene in the entire series. Every word of it is constructed with lots of layers. Each action that Nero takes and the way the scene is set up is full of character and yet full of emotion and theme. So let's start with the thing that begins this scene, which is Nero gives Shelby and Wing the opportunity to back out of the coming mission to defeat Overlord and rescue the 3 other students that were just captured. And Wing says, "My best friend is in the hands of a creature who intends to erase his very spirit and turn him against everything he cares about," he said. "If he succeeds in doing so, there is a very real possibility that he will then go on to enslave every person on the face of the planet. I appreciate the fact that you have given us the opportunity to decide for ourselves if we wish to participate in this endeavor. But you could no more stop me from coming than you could the sun from rising." But that's only the beginning of what this scene is about. Nero respects Wing and Shelby at this point enough to allow them to make their own decisions. But they are only 2 of the alphas who are assembled here. And so Nero makes this speech. It says, "Ladies and gentlemen, you may not all know each other, but you all know me. You doubtless have many questions, but first let me explain why you are here. Yesterday you all had an extremely unusual experience. A signal was transmitted that activated devices you all had implanted into your skulls. The device triggered a post-hypnotic impulse that you will all have felt an irresistible compulsion to obey. You visited an apparently insignificant internet address that provided you with the GPS coordinates of this building. You traveled here from all over the world without really knowing why. You will have somehow known on an instinctual level that you had to come. For this, I apologize. Many of you may resent me for stripping you of your free will, for implanting this device in your head without your knowledge or permission, but it was a necessary evil. This is 0 hour, something that Diabolus Darkdoom and I have been planning for decades. We always feared that a time would come when one of our number would threaten true global domination, a threat so terrible that we would need a final option, a force that we could summon at a moment's notice, and whose loyalty would be unquestionable. You are that force. There was only one way that we could be entirely sure that no one would ever find out what we had planned, or who was a part of this group. We had to make sure that even you were unaware that you were part of it. We also had to face the disturbing possibility that Diabolus or I could become the very threat that you were designed to combat. Even we could not know who you were, just in case it was one day your job to destroy us. The job of selecting which of you would be activated when the time came had to be placed in the hands of someone who would be incorruptible. No person could ever be given that task, and so it had to be carried out by a non-human, artificial intelligence, a system that could track you throughout the globe and assess exactly who were the best people to activate in order to face any crisis that arose. You know that intelligence as hive mind, and it is he who gathered you here today. I gave the order, but he made the selection. He chose which of you would answer the call, which of my best, my brightest, my alphas. And so it becomes apparent that the people who are in this room are a selection of the graduated alphas from the hive from decades ago up until recent ones. Nero didn't know who these people were going to be in advance, but he knows all of their names. He remembers all of them. He treats them all with respect. And the thing is, this scene is effectively a glorified board meeting. It's a briefing where Nero answers these people's questions as they raise their hands one by one, and he calls on them by name. And yet, for some reason, this is like the 6th or 7th time I've read this scene. It makes me cry my eyes out every single time. And so I was reminded of a conversation that I had several weeks ago, about a week and a half before Bloodline came out. 2 or 3 days after Bloodline was announced, I was in the Hive Discord, something I had just joined because I didn't know that it existed. And I was arguing with somebody that I had not yet met about something that had happened in Book 8 and a prediction about what was going to come to pass in the final book. And I've had to severely abridge this conversation, but I made a point about something, and she disagreed with me, and she responded with this. She said, "What is really important about Hive, the books, is not that there is a school and a volcano. The important thing about Hive is that you can be a boy who is strange and disconnected and be loved. It is that you can be a bunch of spoiled people and that you can be found and loved. Even at death's door, loved. You can be a boy who is a computer and be loved. You can fake your death for years and be reunited with your son and be loved. Like, it sounds so cheesy, but for so many of the characters, the world doesn't run on ethics or rules. It runs on being seen by people who are of your same kind. Hive can fall, Glove can fall, Nero can die, and many other things can be lost. But the love cannot be lost, because love is a legacy without destiny, and that is why it freed Otto and Raven, and that's how it will free everyone again." And the conversation obviously was with Mitch. The This was the day that I met her, and then the following morning, I messaged her and said, do you want to do this YouTube video project with me? And that is actually like, I would say it's probably 15% of the entire essay that she sent, but we were actually talking about Book 8, so there's not very much that I could share. But this idea of the Hive as a location being about love completely colored my understanding of the series on this reread. And what we see in this scene with the briefing room is this odd but strong dichotomy that centers around Nero. This thing that he has done to the Alphas, where he took these students who were unable to say no, who had no idea that this was happening to them, who were completely under his protection and care, and he implanted a device in their brains that can mind control them. It's horrible. It ties into the very thing that we have known about Nero since page 1. He is a control freak. He needs to be in control of every aspect of the students' lives, and this just proved to us that he needs to be in control of their lives even after they graduate, even after he is no longer supposed to be responsible for them, even after the point when their parents stopped paying him to take care of them. And yet, in every sentence of this speech, in every raised hand that he knows the name of, it is clear that Nero loves these people. He wants to be a teacher. He wants to be a caretaker. He is exactly what number 1 said he was at the end of book 1. He is a predator that is guarding a very large herd of kittens. But they are his kittens. He's trying to protect them when he does this. This is a protocol that is able to be enacted if he was to be judged as someone who is too dangerous to live. Every aspect of the protocol is supposed to protect the Alphas. He is not able to access their identities. The location that this is transmitted from is secure. When they couldn't transmit it from the Hive, they had to go to Echelon to make sure that nobody would be able to track the Alphas down, because Nero places their safety above all else. And still, this is the kind of controlling behavior that is paralleled only really by Overlord. Overlord wants an army of people that he can control at all times. Nero is a character caught in the middle. We know that he truly means the best, but he's not a man without flaws. And also we get the really, really, really important reveal here that Overlord was supposed to run the 0-hour protocol, which it is fantastic that at the end of the day, the purpose that Overlord was built for is what defeats him. He was supposed to run the 0-hour protocol, and the 0-hour protocol is what shuts him down. But we now understand why Overlord exists. Before, it was like, why did you make this? Why were you so desperate for an AI you can't control? And now we know. This explains a whole lot. Overlord wasn't supposed to be subservient to people. He was supposed to watch out and see if anybody became too dangerous. He was always supposed to rule over the humans. He was always supposed to make judgments about what was best for the humans. It would have been his job to put into motion the death of Nero if he judged it to be correct. Of course, he feels like he's supposed to rule the planet. And now that brings up another question. Why did Nero and Diabolus feel like we needed the 0-hour protocol at all? I guess we'll get to that later. I like the fact there's this little scene where Fran's wants to help fight. It's great. Speaking of Franz, I have to go back and read this little section. I'm thinking that I've been hearing this before, Franz said. Usually just before there is the shooting and the exploding. Well, maybe this time will be different, Shelby replied. Torpedoes in the water! One of Dark Doom's men shouted from the other side of the command center. Great. So we cut back to Otto and the girls who have been captured by Overlord. And Overlord decides to basically torture Otto with the knowledge of the impending doom of humanity rather than just take him over because he just hates people. He hates humans. He is capable of emotion. He's just not doing anything useful with it. He just hates people. And I'm frankly disappointed in Pietor Furan for not realizing that this intense hatred of people will indeed result in Pietor Furan's ultimate demise. Anyway, they take Laura and Lucy separate from Otto, and they keep Lucy sedated. And the thing about Lucy is, she has this low-level sadness at all times, and it's easy to see why. She's afraid that she's going to lose control of herself in the future, but she never really has control of herself at all. The only time she's safe is when she's at the HIVE, a place where Nero is always in control, even though Nero is a better guardian than the Contessa was. You can't really say that she's free there. And then every time she leaves the HIVE, something awful happens. In book 4, she was captured, and they didn't know that she was a Sinister. In book 5, Cypher knew that she was a Sinister and told her that he would kill her if she opened her mouth at all. In this one, they just plumb keep her sedated for effectively the rest of the book. She maintains this optimism, and she is wise, and she tells people truths that help them. But you can see why she would doubt this. Her existence is something that, for lack of a better word, sucks. All of the it's like I said in Rogue, Otto is a person who is very unlucky for the superpowers that he got. His life is effectively torture. And Lucy isn't really much better. She tries to avoid using her powers so that she can eventually be a regular person who isn't used for she doesn't want to have a powerful superpower because she doesn't want people to trip all over each other trying to get at her powerful superpower. But ultimately what that means is that her superpower isn't good enough to defend her if she really needs to. And I kind of get the sense that if she had leaned further into getting better at using the voice, she might have lived. She's in a catch-22. If she had practiced more with the voice, she might have lived, but who would she have become? But she didn't practice, and so she was able to die as herself, but she died at the age of, 17 at most? Yeah. On top of that, you can sort of see in her interactions with Otto and Laura that she doesn't exactly have an optimistic outlook about her relationship with the boy she likes. The audience knows that Otto will eventually somehow end up with Laura, and Lucy appears to also know this. Yeah. It's just a sucky situation for her all around. And I admire the amount of optimism she was able to maintain given it. Our 2 acronyms for this book are 3 of them. We get 3 new acronyms for this book. GCHQ, Global Communication Headquarters, FLIR, Forward Looking Infrared, and ISIS, Integrated Infiltration Suits. Shoot, I have to actually look at what this is. Integrated Systems Infiltration Suit. Yeah. All right. I like the fact that Otto uses his powers to convince things to work. It's very suited to his personality. Like, obviously he's not actually talking to or convincing anything to work. He just thinks of it as, I had a little conversation with the door and it opened, or whatever. It's very suited to who he is. I like the fact that Otto is saved by one of the older graduated alphas later when he's in the Goliath mech. That was just neat. He may think that he doesn't have much in common with what Nero wants out of the students right now, but he does. So I want to highlight this conversation that seems pretty innocuous, but that Otto has with Nero, and it shows a real character development for mostly Otto, really. Nero says, "Get the alphas inside and start to clear the facility of resistance. It's a safe bet that wherever Overlord is, he'll have surrounded himself with his best men. Otto, once we have taken the hangar, you are to stay there with a protective detail. We cannot risk letting you fall into Overlord's hands now." "I know that," Otto replied, "but you have to promise me that we don't leave without Laura and Lucy." "I don't leave people behind, Otto. Surely you've realized that by now." Remember back in book 4 when Otto didn't believe that Nero was going to protect his friends, and so he went all rogue and tried to be the hero and then got himself captured? He actually listens here. He goes, "You know what? You're right." And then instead of going and playing the hero by himself later, he talks to Nero about a plan that he has and says, "Hey, this is what I would like to do. What if we do this?" And Nero says, "That's really risky, but okay." They come to an agreement. They work it out as a team. It's amazing. Yeah, so at first I thought Overlord was being an idiot for not just possessing Otto right off the bat, but he later explains that because he has Laura and Lucy, he knows that Otto isn't going to just leave, and he turns out to be right. So Overlord is exactly as competent as he expected, or as he needed to be. Except, if he had just possessed Otto right off the bat, I don't know, maybe he could have found an alternative solution, but anyway. So Overlord has this, super version of the Animus that is souped up with nanomites that basically intends to, or that, if programmed, can control people's minds and can turn people into mindless drones, which could be controlled by a person with Otto's abilities, but if not programmed, they just self-replicate ad infinitum, which would basically end the entire planet in about a month. And there's effectively nothing anybody could do about it if this happened. So yeah, that's the most literal Oblivion that we can reasonably face. Yep. That's what we're up against. Literally just the destruction of the planet. And later on, Overlord shoots Otto because he's like, well, if I can't have this planet, no one can. Yeah, what a prick. I like the fact that, so because Raven is a competent villain, Pietor Furan is also a really competent villain. He doesn't have much personality, but he is really actually good at his job, and he's not an idiot. So, yeah, seal of approval. But his ironic ending is that he thought he was going to be spared and given a special place in this new society, but in the end, he just becomes one more body for Overlord. I'm DMing this game of Weaver Dice, which is a tabletop game that is about superheroes and stuff. And one of my players is always begging people to just don't be a henchman to a supervillain. It's a terrible idea. Maybe you could be a supervillain and achieve success, but don't ever be a henchman to a supervillain. Your life is gonna suck. And Pietor Furan didn't learn that lesson in time. So Overlord and Pietor Furan retreat to the vault with Laura and Lucy and the big container of nanites. And they just kind of wait for Raven and Otto to show up. And they try to use Raven to get into the room so this is after they have freed Raven. They try to use Raven as an imposter to get back into the bad guy's cave, but immediately Pietor Furan recognizes that she's been turned back and attacks her, which, like I said, competent, threatening villains. Finally, they get into a little scuffle. Overlord tries to take over Lucy's body, which that would have been terrifying. I'm surprised he didn't do that sooner. Well, I mean, he was thinking he would get Otto's body, but I'm surprised he didn't try to inject Lucy with the animus or anything like that, because that would have been very scary. But Otto is able to save her by interfering with Pietor Furan's earpiece, by making it make a really loud noise, and then he jerks back in surprise, and then Otto is able to use it as a distraction to get Lucy out of the way, which just shows that Otto is getting way better at using his powers. He's able to use them in more intelligent ways, which is pretty cool to see. So Overlord tries to take over Otto's body, but there is somebody already inhabiting it. It's Hive Mind. And the fact that Hive Mind is there means that he can defend the implant in Otto's head, which is incredibly thematic. So previously Hive Mind wasn't able to defend against Overlord because he was a much simpler AI. But Overlord rebuilt Hive Mind in his own image. Yeah, okay, he's definitely the Holy Spirit in this metaphor. Anyway, he rebuilt Hive Mind to be the same kind of AI as him, and therefore Hive Mind is much stronger, much more capable, and is the correct kind of AI to inhabit Otto's implant. So Hive Mind is able to defend against Overlord and lock him out. So an action that Overlord took made him incapable of possessing Otto later, which is great. But it also means that, remember how we were talking about how Otto has no defense? He actually does have one defense. His one defense is that he can trust somebody, or rather, he can pick somebody trustworthy to inhabit his body, or inhabit his implant, and defend somebody else from inhabiting his body. So Otto needs to forge connections, treat people well, and have good friends in order to keep himself from being taken over. So Overlord realizes that he's not going to be able to take over Otto's body. And so he releases the nanites and he says, fine, if I can't have this planet, no one can. And this is after both he and Pietor Furan are mortally wounded, so he knows that things are looking really bad. And then he tries to shoot Otto, but Lucy shoves him out of the way and takes the bullet. Yeah. And this is the bit that makes Book 6 disliked by some people. Even more so than the presence of a love triangle. It's the fact that Lucy died for Otto. It makes people uncomfortable with who Lucy was at all. Instead of being her own person, she's a person who revolves around Otto. It makes the story feel like more of a story and less like a living world. Because the more that things revolve around Otto, the less real it feels. But at the same time, I told Mitch that this feels like the Star Wars prequels, right? Not that bad, not as bad as the Star Wars prequels, but the thing about the Star Wars prequels is that if you write out the actual ideas, it's a great idea. It's a lot of really, really interesting, thematically rich, good ideas. But in execution, there are a series of huge fumbles. The acting is difficult to stomach because the dialogue is atrocious. Those kinds of problems are what make Lucy's plot difficult to stomach, because all of the things, if you write out everything about Lucy's plot, it seems like a great idea, but in execution it feels wrong, it feels off. She feels disconnected from a lot of other things that are going on, particularly the other students, even though thematically she's very well connected to Overlord. Her catchphrase is, "There always has to be a choice," which is in direct conflict with Overlord's desire to control everyone on the planet. Overlord represents Oblivion, but Lucy represents how Oblivion can be stopped by someone giving their all to make a difference. But also in the past, she has represented constant effort towards defending against darkness. And I want to talk about what the name Lucy Dexter means. So for one, her actual name is Lucia, which is Latin for light. But I want to talk about the origin of the word sinister. So sinister is the Latin word for left. In olden times, if you were left-handed, people thought that you were evil. Being left-handed meant that you were possessed or cursed at birth. People would go to extraordinary lengths to try to correct a child's left-handedness. They would tie their left hand to their side and make them learn how to write with their right hand and stuff like that. Because a left-handed person was perceived to be cursed, to be evil. And eventually, the word left in Latin, sinister, became synonymous with evil. We don't think of left-handed people as evil because they share a name with the word sinister. Sinister means evil because it originally meant left-handed. So what's the word for right-handed? It's Dexter. Dexter means right, as in the direction right. And when Lucy takes the name Lucy Dexter, it means I have a connection to the name Sinister, but I am the opposite. I am one of those people, but I am the opposite of that. So she is right-handed. She participates in society. She's not evil. And she is light. She is hope. At the beginning of the story, at the beginning of 0 Hour, she provides Otto with hope for his own future. But when she dies, part of that hope is lost. She gives Otto and the rest of the world hope by ensuring that everybody is able to get out of the facility alive, and ensuring that Otto is able to call the president and have the facility nuked and all that stuff, thus saving the planet. But the hope that she gave to Otto specifically, in that he could have friends who are not put in danger, which is what their original conversation was about, him doubting whether he could ever have close friends that would not be put in danger. He will probably never believe that again. Yes, he was given life by Lucy, but he also now knows that the people he truly cares about die. And after this, Otto turns into a horrible person all over again. And he doesn't do anything horrible, but when he's interacting with the people in the following scene, he's turned back into that bratty little child we saw in the flashback in book 1. He's callous, he's mean, he's dismissive. Because all of the growth that he's had up until that point all of the hope and love that he has felt being at the Hive. It's all gone. And he's able to get it back later, but how much was he able to get it back? So I talked a little bit about how, so Lucy inspires Otto to take agency in his own life and try to take control and stuff. There's one other person that Otto influences to take better control and to watch themselves more carefully. And it's Barack Obama. No. So at the end of the story, Otto calls up the president and says, hey, I really need you to nuke the advanced weapons facility, and the Advanced Weapons Project facility. Oh my gosh, that's a fourth acronym. The ABWP facility. I need you to nuke that with the Hammer of Thor that we were trying to prevent from going off back in book 4. And the president says, okay, because he realizes that he has to trust Otto because he doesn't know enough about the situation. And throughout this entire book, the president has been desperately trying to get control, desperately trying to get information, but he didn't understand well enough in advance. He didn't know about the disciples, he didn't know about Glove, and now he's realizing that there's a whole lot of things he doesn't understand. So at the end of the book, he hires this man named Flack but there's a guy who works in a section of the CIA named Flack, whom he talks to and says, all right, I don't know enough. What I have learned over the course of the past couple of days is that I thought I was the most powerful man on the planet, and apparently I have no idea what's going on underneath my nose. I need you to look into Otto Malpence and tell me what there is to know about him. Who does he work for? Where does he come from? And this actually shows character growth in the generic president in our sci-fi series, which is just wild to me, but also awesome, because this character growth comes from our protagonist. And also, it's Obama. Anyway. So after this, Otto puts HiveMind back in his data center, and HiveMind thanks him for the ability to see what it's like to be human. The thing is, at the beginning of book 1, HiveMind wanted something else, and he didn't really know what it was. He just knew that he didn't like being in the Hive because he was disrespected. He didn't have access to the internet. Everybody treated him like crap. Everybody kept talking about how I don't want to have to work with this robot, blah, blah, blah. And then over the course of the series, he has gained respect. He has gained the love of Nero and Laura and Pike and Otto. And he was able to access the internet. And then he wanted to know what it's like to be alive. And now he knows all of those things. And that's why he was willing to die for the Hive at the beginning of this book. But he has gained a lot of experience and a lot of knowledge. And he's grateful. He's humble about it, which is really what sets him apart from Overlord. Overlord believed all of these things are his right. And HiveMind believed that he had the right to be treated better back in book 1. But he didn't believe that he had the right to take over the planet. So Otto asks HiveMind to let him use a phone line to the outside to activate this shutdown virus that he created for Echelon, thus doing probably it's not even Otto's first, doing a public service in a supervillain way. That was back in book 1 when he yoked the British Prime Minister, but it's the first time he's done that since then. It's something that he did completely without the influence of Nero. It's something that he did for himself, but also with the knowledge of who he actually is. He knows that one day, or on some level, he knows that one day, he isn't going to be Diabolus Darkdoom. He's not going to be some Batman villain doing silly pranks. But he's starting to figure out what he does want. Nero gets rid of the Glove Ruling Council. I don't really understand this decision. I mean, I do. but I don't. Mitch and I had a long conversation about it before I did this video, but I ultimately kind of needed her explanation, and I don't know if she's going to talk about this yet because she hasn't decided what she's going to talk about yet. She's going to record hers and send it to me, so whatever she's going to talk about in about 5 minutes, I don't know what it is. And it could be this, but the reason Nero gets rid of the ruling council is because he knows that it's rotten. He knows that the ruling council was mostly selected by number one, who was actually Overlord, who was actually mostly running this disciples, and half the ruling council is disciples and stuff. So he realizes that they need to make drastic changes. At the same time, this is going to cause a lot of anger. Anybody that was pretending to be part of the ruling council before and was actually a disciple is going to go all in on the disciples. There are going to be a lot of people that were just fired from their jobs who are going to be brought in by the disciples. I hope that Nero is prepared for the backlash that he's going to receive from this decision. He just pissed off a lot of very powerful people. So I forgot to talk about this earlier, but there's this paragraph in Otto's conversation with Lucy at the beginning of the book where he says, it's just that sometimes I feel like I'm always going to be a pawn in someone else's game. Ever since you guys rescued me from Brazil, I can't stop thinking about the fact that I wasn't born like everyone else. I was designed, created to be a vessel for Overlord. I never had a family, anyone who actually cared about my existence. Just people who built me for a specific purpose. It's left me feeling, I don't know, separate from everything somehow, I guess. And the thing is, Otto is very alone. And this isn't the first time that he's brought up wondering what it would have been like if he'd had a family. He knows that his friends love him. He knows that his friends will come get him, but he feels guilt about it. He doesn't want to drag people into it. He wishes he didn't have the implant in his head because he wants the people around him to be safe. But at the same time, he wants emotional support. He wants people who have to be there for him. Not just people who choose him, but people who are stuck with him. People who aren't going to leave. And Lucy offers to be that person here. He can't have a family, but he could have a romantic relationship with someone who will stick with him. Someone who is closer than just friendship. But she dies. It's like I said about Laura at the beginning of this. She could have gone to Otto and supported him, but she didn't. Lucy did. And that's why what happened happened. At the end of the book, Otto is sitting in the atrium, and he is turning over the events of the last couple of days in his head. It says he knew it would do no good to dwell on the what-ifs and maybes of what happened, but that didn't change that he desperately wished that things could have turned out differently. Laura sat down on the seat next to him, looking at him with a slightly worried expression. And what happens here is that Laura actually gives him some good advice about how to feel about Lucy's death, but also listens to his problems and provides support. It's stated earlier that Laura expected, quote, something else out of Otto. Probably just hoped that things would just work out between the two of them, but Otto doesn't want a girlfriend who is just going to do programming with him. He already has Laura and Hivemind and Pike to do programming with. He wants and needs emotional support. And Laura here realizes that she can be that person, and that she needs to be that person if what she expected at the beginning of this book is to ever come to pass. So what Otto says is, I can't shake this feeling that Lucy traded her future for mine. Maybe she did, Laura said. And if that's true, the worst, most selfish thing you could do is waste what she has given you. Everything you get to do from this point onwards is thanks to her. Don't think about what might have been. Think about what's going to be. That's all she would have wanted. She gives him advice that is good for him and not just cliches, not just not meaningless, but impersonal advice. There have been a couple of conversations like that throughout the series. One, Raven's conversation with him in book 2. 2, Lucy's conversation at the beginning of this one. I would like to be able to count the conversation he had with Nero at the end of book 5, but Nero didn't really help him. And then this one, where somebody actually reaches out, recognizes that Otto is struggling, and actually tries to help him. And this is kind of what Otto needs to hear. He doesn't want somebody to say that he needs to move on with his life. Laura is willing to acknowledge that his feeling that Lucy traded her life for his is what happened. That is, she literally did die to protect him, and that happened. And now he has to figure out how to deal with that. It's not just that somebody that he was close to died. How does he need to think about the fact that somebody gave up their life for his? And from then on, he is able to sit and joke with his friends. And he doesn't... And after this, he isn't 100% better. He's not just magically going to, be over Lucy's death. But he can move forward. He can do something with himself. So after this, we get some hilarious Wing, Shelby, and Franz banter. Franz declares himself Silent Death, and the book ends. So this is another one of those books that you can kind of stop here if you want to. Yes, there's more political stuff going on. Nero's plot with getting rid of the ruling council and stuff is definitely going to do something in the future, but Otto's dad is dead again. And you can kind of step off the train here. Otto is, maybe he isn't happy, but he is safe. And so are the other kids that aren't dead. So because you can kind of stop reading at this point, we've reached the end of another arc. There's no novella that comes between arcs 2 and 3. We will be catching up with Aftershock, also known as the one where they go to Siberia. This one maybe isn't the best book in the series, but it was my favorite when I first read it, for a lot of reasons. I've actually already written like 3 essays about this one, and I haven't even reread it. I'm really excited to have finished recording this video, because it means I can get to rereading this one. This is literally like the exact opposite of book 6 in every way, so I'm really excited. Yeah. Now I'm turning it over to Mitch.
Hi there, it's me, Mitch, back again, joining you in my pajamas because it is almost time for bed. And I am here to talk to you about 0 Hour, of course, and so thanks again to Jade for letting me tag team with her on this super fun video series. Again, it is almost time for bed, so if I'm a little slow, bear with me. So, 0 Hour, book 6. One of my favorites, funnily enough. I think, like, for many people, the first time they read 0 Hour, they're profoundly dissatisfied with it because it's not what they were expecting. I think that's very understandable. And I say dissatisfaction just because, like, I have been on Tumblr and I have read many a post that wishes that there was, like, something else. Not necessarily, like, certain specific things to help bridge the distance between Rogue and 0 Hour. For example, more exploration of Otto's trauma from Animus, or just a more thorough exploration of what the relationships are that are going on. And they aren't there, and that's disappointing for some folks. It takes maybe a little while to learn to love 0 Hour, but I think when you can accept it for what it is, it's got a lot going for it. And I mean, on a personal note, I feel like the gap that we get between Rogue and 0 Hour is just very, like, everything between, like, Rogue and 0 Hour, in my opinion, is just, like, the best place to think about things, because with these gaps, there's so much room for interpretation. And speaking for myself personally, most of the fan fiction I have written is taking place either in Rogue, in 0 Hour, or in between the events of the two books. If you discount all of my Raven backstory fanfiction, which I did not mention before. But there's a lot going on with this space here, and I think a big part of that is because it is a gap closer in terms of an overarching plot in the series. The biggest issue being Overlord. This is the conclusion of the Overlord arc that is set up beginning in Book 2. In Book 2, we learn that Nero is responsible for creating Overlord, and finally, in Book 6, he ultimately owns up to that, more or less. We could talk about that because I'm not sure it's true, but I don't want to for this video, so I'll just casually throw out there that I disagree with myself, my assertion, let's say. Anyway, Nero takes responsibility for Overlord, and ultimately Overlord is finished and dies. But that said, it doesn't completely close up the gap for Otto, because Otto's main conflict, I would argue, and this assertion I do believe, Otto's main conflict has never been defeating Overlord. It has been existing for the benefit of other people. And while Overlord is dead, Otto is still prime real estate for others to take advantage of. And that is what will drive us in the final 3 books in the series. So ultimately, kind of what I wanted to speak on with this, because of how the story flows. Jade had her thoughts on this issue, but 0 Hour, among other things, I think gets the worst rap for the love triangle between Lucy and Otto and Laura, and that's that. But I also think we should not discount its value as an interesting thing that is happening in the series. So I choose that because I think it can be hard for me to talk about the things I love in this book, because they just get so specific that it's like, dang, it's hard to follow. Whereas this is broad enough to understand that even if I make criticisms, I still very much love the book. Which leads to my big overarching question here, which is the question, what is love? And particularly, specifically, what is love within the context of the HIVE universe? And it's important, I think, to ask this question because from the beginning we understand that the villains who are present in the HIVE series are not altogether the soulless archetypal villains that you're used to in superhero movies where they exist merely to fulfill a role. These are meant to be fleshed out people who have wants and desires and needs and loves and hates, and that is who they are. And so in having characters who love, HIVE makes a statement about love itself. And so I'll just dive right in with the one that we get hit on the head the hardest with, which is Otto and Lucy, and what love means. So for the most part, I'm just gonna review loving relationships I see in the book and compare them, because that is what I decided to do. But Otto and Lucy, I think their love story, if you would like to call it that, first of all, it's very sudden. There's no foreshadowing of them being interested in one another. There's nothing that really primes us for this concept. And I think you should never underestimate how important it is to prime an audience for a concept. For those of you who are familiar with the TV show Leverage, Leverage was a show that ran about 10 years ago, and one of the executive producers was a man named John Rogers. He is extensively featured in the audio commentary on the Leverage series. For those of you who aren't familiar with Leverage, it is a heist show, and it covers the lives of 5 thieves who run up against modern villains of all kinds, running from the big CEOs of companies to downright no good psychics who just take advantage of people for their money. And Leverage seeks to offer innocent victims assistance in getting help after they have been screwed over by usually a bigger organization. And without getting too much into detail, one of the actresses got pregnant in the 2nd season, so she had to go, and because her role was important, they ended up bringing in like a substitute character to take on her role during that season, which is a tricky move because we already know this one character. We like this character. We don't want to see her go away, and we don't like that some other random person is taking her place. That is, for us, the audience, not fun, and we don't like it. And so coming up with like a compelling character who is new and who is specifically designed to replace another character is tricky. But in the commentary, John Rogers says in like the movie business, they were testing a movie, had an unlikable character, and nobody in the audience liked it. They didn't like the movie. They were thinking they were gonna have to scrap the whole thing. But then what they did is they just added a small scene where there's a little girl who like thanked or appreciated the unlikable character, and suddenly all the problems went away. And so as an audience, we are primed to like things based off of what the characters in the story like, which I think means that because like there's like nothing in Rogue, there's nothing Lucy and Otto in Rogue, and the fact that we weren't mentally prepared for that makes it such a jarring beginning to 0 Hour, particularly when we have been primed for a Laura-Otto relationship since a while now. I mean, I guess we were primed. There's that one scene in Rogue where they're like in prison and Shelby's like, ooh, Laura, looks like you have some competition, and Laura's like, well, it doesn't matter because I don't have a crush on Otto. But of course she does have a crush on Otto. So anyways, we weren't primed for the Lucy-Otto relationship sufficiently. And it's not just important that we're expecting it, but that someone is a fan of it. So there was nobody who was a fan of Lucy-Otto beforehand. Even I think if Shelby had said something like, wow, you guys would be such a cute couple, we would be like at least 10% more ready for what happened here. And then it all goes to hell at the end because, of course, Lucy dies. And so we have this love story that is just like teenage hormones and then suddenly brutal sacrifice at the end. And what I think this does is it creates this sense that like first love has to be unique and special and dramatic, and I don't know if that's true, but it kind of just throws off the vibe of the series a little bit because having an ultimate sacrifice romance, I think the issue I have is that the stakes are messed up. If you have been following me on Tumblr, you know that I have been a little bit annoyed with the stakes in this book because there's an illusion that because this all happened at the Advanced Weapons Project facility, no civilians were ever truly in danger because they threatened it. But by my math, there's no way that they're more than 2 hours away from a reasonably big city in Colorado, which means that there was danger. So the stakes are all messed up. And similarly here, it's like, was Lucy the love of Otto's life? The answer is no, because you don't really find the love of your life in high school 99% of the time. But because Lucy dies so suddenly, it's elevated into like this huge dramatic thing. But more on that later. I'm going to compare that real quick to Otto and Laura, which is clearly strained because, again, we were all primed for the Lucy-Otto romance. Maybe he was like trying to be like a twist, and I guess love triangles were really big 10 years ago. But it didn't work, we can all agree. So anyway, the relationship between Otto and Laura becomes one of competition and even, I would say, like, comparison, really. Like, Laura had anticipated that Otto would choose her, and now, like, she feels like she's the second choice, no matter what. So that's cool. Which I think is also interesting because I'm not limiting my conversation of love simply to romance in this. Of course not. Why would I do that? But there are a few moments, I think, where we get a sense that, like, Wing is much more attuned to Laura's emotions than Otto is, by a long shot. Specifically evidenced by the fact that Wing asks Otto to talk to Laura because he thinks that she's been hurt, and he's right, she has. Which I think is one of the, like, smaller Wing Laura moments in the series, but I think it's very powerful that Wing knows what's up when Otto doesn't. I think also if perhaps Mark Weldon had, like, perhaps characterized Otto as being more spacey and out of it, which is something I consciously do in my fanfiction, but whatever, it might be more understandable or believable for the audience that Otto has less of an understanding of how people are and what they're feeling now because he's so much in his head all the time. But he didn't, because I think he was afraid to make Otto too weak. But his gambit failed. But it's fine because I love 0 Hour so much. Okay. Moving on, because I don't want this to take forever. I do want to go to bed. Wing and Shelby, on the other hand, are like the good romance that's happening in this story, while Otto and Lucy and Laura are having their trash fire of a relationship going down. Which I think part of it is, like, we were primed. We've known since, like, book 2 that Shelby is ready for Wing whenever he's ready. She's just, like, open standing invitation for him anytime he wants. They have a lot of chemistry together, they have great banter together, but also we see that, like, they train together, they're teaching each other, they're learning from each other, and ultimately they're safe together, which I think is very sweet, and something that is not true of Laura or Otto or Lucy, that ultimately between the three of them, none of them are ever safe together, which is a little sad, and an interesting reflection on protagonist syndrome. And that idea of safety is actually one I want to talk about more as a component of love as it is characterized in the Hive series. Because love as a word is just very vague. It can mean a lot of things. It could be romance, it could mean parental love, it could mean friendship love, it could mean, like, your generic affection for your coworkers, it can mean thinking that an object is beautiful. In English we use this word for a lot of things. But safety is something concrete, a feeling of safety, a feeling that together, and, like, evidenced by the fact that, for example, Wing and Shelby together defeat the bad guys on the airplane to America. Together they make each other stronger, and together they make each other safer. They have a better chance of survival together. And clearly, since Lucy died, they don't have a better chance of survival together. Which then suggests that perhaps it's not love, but more on that in a minute. Another example of love and safety, I think, is the friendship that exists between Nero and Dark Doom in this book. Specifically, the fact that of all the people in all the world and all the friends that Nero has, because making friends is like his whole thing. He's friends with everybody. The only friend he's ever shared his 0 hour plan with is Diabolus Dark Doom. That has been like their thing. They are homies together, and only together do they have the relative safety of planning to stop a global takeover event, which I think is like important too, because we know from other books that Professor Pike is one of Nero's reasonably close friends, and of course there's Raven, but she's busy being controlled by Animus in this book. To be fair, it's evidence that Raven doesn't know about 0 hour in her conscious mind because the Animus doesn't know about 0 hour, which means that even Raven, his most trusted operative, doesn't know about 0 hour, but Diabolus Dark Doom does. Because they're safe together, and because they can trust each other, and because they're just so competent and great at what they're doing. That's like not necessarily just my opinion, it's just like the book series prioritizes Diabolus as being like the most competent villain of all time, and I agree a little bit. And so together they have this idea that they only entrust to each other, and that is what they are doing together. So that's cool. And not to like discount any other friendships, I would also say that the finale where Franz announces his new identity as the Silent Death is also an example of love and friendship that should not be discounted. So since I have said it, we can move on, but I'm just throwing out there. It's great. Which really only leaves me with like 2 more relationships that I think are very worth talking about. The first being Otto and Hive Mind. And I'm not sure I have a word for their relationship. Like, part of me like imagines like a meme of Otto and Hive Mind going through like the whole New World sequence from the movie Aladdin, because like the Hive Mind has never experienced being human before, so he's just like, this is the best thing ever. And then after that they could do human again from Beauty and the Beast, and then when we're human from Princess and the Frog. That would be such good crackfic, but whatever. Anyways, I'm gonna read a part. This is from page 37 in one of the early chapters. Is it chapter 1 for reals? It's chapter 2. This is in chapter 2, page 37. Otto and Hive Mind. We're being serious now and not making Disney references. Otto is connecting to Hive Mind to see if Overlord's hanging out in there at all. Otto closed his eyes and mentally reached out for the digital activity within Hive Mind servers. It was quite unlike any other computer that he'd ever connected with. Normal computers were like organized grids with rigidly defined pathways that could be traced and controlled, but Hive Mind was different. Myriad patterns of swirling blue light flowed around him like waves, their shapes organic and unpredictable, and yet somehow not chaotic. Otto could not help but be amazed by its seemingly boundless complexity, and he found himself wondering if this might be what it was like to see inside the workings of someone else's mind. He forced himself to concentrate. As beautiful as this datascape might be, he was there for a reason, and then they do the brain thing. Which is an important parallel as well to the end when Hive Mind is like by the way, Otto, that was so special to me. And Otto's like, you're welcome. And he's like, it was so special. It's special for them both. There's something, I think, to be said about, I don't know where I heard this, but there's an idea that math is the language of the universe, and that in understanding math, we will get a better understanding, like, which is to say, like, there's mathematical equations for the way that the leaves grow. There's mathematical equations to explain the way waterfalls drop as they do. Math can give form and name to those things that we try to name with language. And I think that's a little bit of what we're seeing with Otto and Hive Mind, with that description of essentially Hive Mind's brain. Hive Mind is just almost like a force of nature in his organicness, and that gives him a quality of life that isn't human but is nonetheless unique and full of life. And the fact that Otto and Hive Mind cohesively occupy the same body in this book really, like, creates a sense of, like, bondedness that doesn't exist anywhere else in the series, and also kind of defies naming, in my opinion. Because, like, it's not a romance, of course, in the same way that Lucy and Otto are a romance. And I don't want to suggest it's, like, romantic, ew, but nor is it, like, parental, but nor is it, like, merely friendship, because my friends all have their own bodies to hang out in. There's, like, a shared experience there that's happening between them, a mutual appreciation for the complexities of the other's being that cannot be translated to other people because they are in themselves the only one of their own kind. There are no other people like Otto, and there are no other computers like Hive Mind. And I include Overlord in that. They're not the same. Hive Mind's cool and Overlord's not, and that's the main difference. So again, there's beauty in their closeness, and that's cool and good. And I think it is love, even though I can't, like, explain what that love is. I think it's, like, they have to love each other because they have witnessed something so intimate about the other, and that's only something you could appreciate in somebody you love. So I don't know if that really made a ton of sense, but that is what I'm going to close with on that, because I have my last and final loving relationship in this book, which is, of course, Nero and Raven. I love, like, everything about Nero and Raven in this book. They're, like, besties. I don't know. I like them a lot. Everyone knows this about me. I know this about me painfully well. My favorite thing about Nero in this book is that he almost, he does shoot. He does try. He tries to shoot Raven in the head 2 times and succeeds one of the times, 50%. Which I think is just, like, cool of him. Which you might be saying, gosh, like, and, like, Raven stabs him. Do you have a good, healthy opinion of loving relationships? But here's the thing, that's not, like, what this is about, in my opinion. I don't want to be stabbed in my relationships, but that's not the point. The point is that their relationship is extremely compelling and also, like, extremely intertwined, and because of the nature of their closeness, there's also something being said about love between them here and now. And I don't think it's just, like, pain, because there is an exchange of pain where he shoots her and she stabs him, and, like, is that all there is? Because I would say no, there isn't. I think, like, this is probably the book where we understand undeniably that these are two characters who love each other, but we don't fully understand why, we don't have the context. We don't know anything else other than the fact that they're friends. That friendship is potent, it is one of the defining features of their lives. The thing about Nero, I'll say, is that he is possibly the only character, with maybe an exception for Cypher, but I think it's just Nero, who's willing to kill the person he loves most, to save the world. It's not something that Dark Doom can do. It's not something that, with Nigel, of course, it's not something that others can do. Again, I'm tired. I'd think of better examples later, but we'll just operate on the premise that there aren't a lot of other people who personally kill their favorite person in the whole world. And I think, like, for me, I partially just love the ambiguity of what the Animus does to Raven, because it's like, is the Animus its own entity that has, like, its own mind, or is it simply a computer interpreting the memories that exist inside of Raven? So, like, kind of like if you left a car in gear and then just let it roll through a parking lot. Nobody's driving it, but it's still going. Is this, like, simply how Raven would go if she were this kind of person? Or is there, like, actively volition on the part of the Animus? Is it passive or active? We don't know. But the thing we do know is that Animus Raven believes that Nero wouldn't kill her, and it's unclear if that's something actual Raven thinks too. And I just think that's, like, so good. Such a good detail. The friendship aspect of this is that I think towards the beginning of the book, Nero looks at Raven for the first time and sees someone, looks at Raven and for the first time sees someone he can't save. Or, like, she is a person he can't save, which has never happened to him before. And so I then think, like, the fact that Nero is willing to kill Raven also has its own ambiguity, because on the one hand, there's the potential that, like, he just does compartmentalize like that, or that if he's looking at Raven and thinks that Animus has killed her, then he's, like, preserving whatever is left of her and her body, and making it so that she is preserved in death, if not in life. Which I think is also kind of fun. I think it's, like, the reason it's partially interesting and why I wanted to bring it up is that for Otto and Lucy, we do have this, like, massive sacrifice at the end, where love is not about safety. And it's instead about, like, these passionate acts of romantic dramaticness, I don't know, that indicate the potence of their love or something. I don't know. Just by the fact that she did that, it's like, wow, she did that. Whereas, I think the best part of Nero and Raven's relationship is that in the books, they add a dose of realism to the series. So even if Otto and Wing and Laura and Shelby have this optimistic view and this belief that they aren't going to get hurt, Nero and Raven consistently throughout the series represent people who know how bad things can get and who have lived through things being very, very much worse. And so, once again, Nero and Raven don't necessarily represent safety to one another in a physical sense because they hurt each other. And yet, even though they are not completely safe with one another, they find refuge within one another. And that to me is beautiful. I love that that is what their idea of love is. Not safety, but refuge, of sanctuary in their relationship. And it's something I like to write about, and it's something I like to read about, and I think is great. Ultimately, to wrap this up, so we do get a lot of different ideas of love in 0 Hour. We get friendship with Franz and his friends, and with Nero and Darkdoom, and Laura and Wing. We get some fun teenage romance with Wing and Shelby, and we get some less fun teenage romance with the love triangle. But ultimately, my favorite is Nero and Raven, and their kind of determination to find peace. Maybe not peace, that was like very corny of me to say, not peace. Well, they might find pieces of each other at the rate things are going. I like refuge. Just a person who is safe for the other, emotionally, mentally, who knows each other, who they don't have to pretend around, kinda, where there's no need to pretend because they already know, is really cool. And also I think that just is like something that I think is important moving forward, and it was one of my deep anxieties about Bloodline when it was coming out, that that sense of refuge would be lost, that it had been so long that Mark forgot that the thing these two characters are all about is not just violence, but refuge, if not safety. But the good thing is that in the end, I don't think that was lost, and that the parts I love about 0 Hour are things I can still carry with me moving forward, knowing how everything ends in the end. So you will get there when you get there too, I am sure. But thanks again to Jade for hosting, and good night for reals.
All right, so the discussion question for this week is, HIVE has a really interesting mix of child and adult characters. We've got, Otto, Laura, Wing, and Shelby on the kid end, and among the adults, we have Hive Mind, Nero, Raven, Pike. And I found that a lot of the younger audience actually really, truly cares about the adults. This isn't the kind of series where the adults don't matter. The adults not only do matter, but are beloved by the audience. So I want you to tell me about a series where something similar is achieved, or tell me a series where that isn't achieved well and why. Yeah, see you in the next one.